Tonight, we're in Cumbernauld, one of Scotland's best-known new towns. It was created 70 years ago to reduce housing pressure in Glasgow, just 13 miles down the road. Since then, it's been criticised for its design and its layout, but it's also been named Scotland's best town. So what matters most to the people who live here? Tonight, local voters from across the political spectrum have come to the Cumbernauld Theatre to share their views. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland where you get to put your questions to the people in power, answering them on our panel this evening. From Scottish Labour, Monica Lennon is an MSP for Central Scotland. A candidate for the Scottish Labour leadership in 2021, she resigned from the front bench later that year. Before politics, Monica worked as a town planner in South Lanarkshire. From the Scottish Conservatives, Craig Hoy is an MSP for the South of Scotland and the party's former chairman. He's now their spokesperson for finance and local government. Before politics, Craig worked as a journalist and was the founding editor of Holyrood magazine. Also with us tonight, the Reform UK councillor for Glasgow Shettleston, Thomas Kerr. Thomas was on the programme last summer representing the Scottish Conservatives, but he defected just 2 months ago, saying he was annoyed and angry with the Tories for failing to champion working class communities. And finally, from the SNP, Fulton MacGregor is the MSP for Coatbridge and Christon, a former North Lanarkshire councillor. Fulton spent 12 years as a social worker before being elected to Holyrood 9 years ago. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And of course, welcome to our studio audience. Great to have you with us and to be back here in Cumbernauld. And you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you happen to be in Scotland this evening. BBCDN is the hashtag you need right now on social media. And our Debate Night podcast of the show will be available for you to download straight after this broadcast. So let's get started. It's been a busy day. Our first question of the night comes from Susan Fotheringham. Susan, evening.
What will Nicola Sturgeon's lasting legacy be as an MSP and as First Minister?
Thank you, Susan. Scotland's longest-serving First Minister announced today that she's standing down from Holyrood at the next election. It'll be 27 years as an MSP. What will be her lasting legacy? Fulton MacGregor, you said you got into politics because of her.
Yeah, I think that Nicola Sturgeon leaves a fantastic legacy, and I think that will be told in time. I think that you're right to say that. I did get into politics as elected as an MSP through Nicola Sturgeon and what she was doing around about that time. After the independence referendum, when she took over leadership of the party, I found her very, very inspiring, and I found that she had a clear vision for Scotland. I think that Scotland is a better place because of Nicola Sturgeon and the government that she's led, and I really do think that she has got a lasting legacy. You know, during the COVID pandemic, I think was probably one place where we've really seen that come to the fore. The clearness of her leadership, the strength of her leadership during those difficult times were there for everybody. And, you know, I still go out to schools on a regular basis, like all members of Parliament do. And one question that I always get asked by the kids, in primary schools particularly, always comes up when it comes to question time is, do you know Nicola Sturgeon? Have you met Nicola Sturgeon? Seriously, it's almost a standard question that comes up, and she's left that legacy because she connected with people.
But she didn't deliver independence. What should she have done differently over her time?
Well, I think that she'd done all she could to promote the case of independence. It was a difficult period because we had just had the referendum in 2014 where, unfortunately, from my point of view, we did vote no. So we went into a period where, you know, it was important for the Scottish people to have time to think about that decision. And I think that we were making really good progress there. And then we obviously were hit with a global pandemic, which I think, quite rightly, took up all politicians' time. OK. Monica
Lennon, first female First Minister, but a very divisive figure amongst women in Scotland. What's her legacy?
Well, I think that is a massive part of Nicola Sturgeon's story. She did smash many glass ceilings in her time in politics, and you have to remember, as a very young woman, you know, she campaigned from a young age joined the Scottish Parliament in 1999. So it's been a long time in the Parliament, and there's been many people announcing in recent weeks that they're not going to stand again. I don't think anyone's surprised today by the decision. The timing was always a matter for Nicola Sturgeon, but I think it is important that we've now had our first woman First Minister. And I think, to Fulton's point, in many ways, Nicola Sturgeon has been a role model. I think I noticed a shift after that 2014 referendum. Doors that I knocked on here in Lanarkshire, where people would never have voted SNP, they certainly wouldn't have voted for Alex Salmond. But when Nicola Sturgeon became the First Minister, all of a sudden people who were previously voting for different parties were quite excited about Nicola Sturgeon. Now, I think her record as First Minister and her government is clearly very mixed, and I have very large concerns about the issues that we have to deal with in Scotland. I think on individual policies, you know, Nicola Sturgeon is still being held to account for what she maybe overpromised and under-delivered. But from a personal point of view, in my time in the Scottish Parliament, we were able to work together on what I think were transformational issues, like the legislation on free period products, Scotland being the first country in the world to pass that law. And I'm going to blow my own trumpet, but as the woman who brought the bill forward, I think it shows that having women in the Parliament actually matters, and having a woman as First Minister absolutely matters. And another issue that perhaps didn't get the same attention, you know, working with Nicola Sturgeon's office, we were able to get a national apology from the Scottish Government for people affected by historic forced adoption. And that's a massive injustice to women. And again, that really mattered to people. So for those reasons, I think, you know, it's a day for reflection, but at the end of the day, it's up to the public to decide if they want that brand of politics in future.
OK, quite complimentary so far. Let's see if that's about to continue. Craig Hoy.
Well, look, I recognise that Nicola Sturgeon was a very big figure. She was a trailblazer, the first female First Minister in Scotland. She had a big role and she had a big platform for which to deliver for the Scottish people. But I think the sad reflection after 8 years as her being First Minister is that she didn't deliver for all of Scotland. In fact, she left Scotland a more divided country at the end of her First Ministership than she found even after the independence referendum. And I recognise she was the first female First Minister, but she was also the First Minister who didn't recognise what she was doing through the gender recognition reform laws, that she was putting in jeopardy women's rights and women's safe spaces, as we were debating in Parliament today.
She was a five-time election winner.
She was, and she was also the Education Secretary in Scotland that said she would make education her #1 priority, and went on to undermine Scottish education with it slipping down international league tables, where now 15% of young people in Scotland leave school without any qualifications. And I recognise she was a very effective communicator during the COVID pandemic, and we can't take that away from her. But we also found out subsequently that she went on to delete all of her WhatsApp messages, and that actually during that public health crisis, where people were worried about their loved ones and their families, behind the scenes, Nicola Sturgeon and her advisers were trying to work out how to use that for constitutional and political advantage. So she left office, I think, leaving the country more divided. There is still a cloud hanging over her party, and I wish her well in her retirement. But I think that many people in Scotland are now quite pleased that the curtain is falling on Nicola Sturgeon's era in public office.
Thomas Kerr, what was her greatest achievement for you?
Well, thank you for asking me that question. No, look, I think that she's obviously been... she's put in a tough shift as First Minister. She had a long time in office and had done a tough shift. And I think having to go through the COVID pandemic, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So I think that she deserves credit for how she managed to handle it. But I think Craig's right. There's been a lot of rewriting of how history is going to work with Nicola Sturgeon. And I think her legacy is actually one of division, of hatred and of political spin. Because she came into office with a lot of big promises and she hardly delivered anything. If you look at every domestic policy that Nicola Sturgeon came into office to say she was going to fix, she left office with it in a worse state than when she came in. And I think that's the reality of how her First Ministership will be looked at. If you look at education, she promised to be our #1 priority. We were falling down league tables. You look at the NHS, we had record waiting lists. You look at drug deaths, she admitted that she took her eye off the ball. So I think when you look at every single issue that domestically she was in charge of, she had failed at that. And I think that there's a lot of political spin with how people try and rewrite it. I totally understand where Fulton's coming from, because she was a very good communicator. But being a good communicator doesn't necessarily mean that you're a great leader. And I think that's the big question about how Nicola Sturgeon's legacy will be looked at in Scotland.
Let's find out what the... that's what the panel think. What do the audience think about this? Man at the back first, yes.
I think during the pandemic, Nicola Sturgeon being on telly every single day as the face of the government telling us what was going on was something I personally found really, really reassuring. It helped me get through that whole period. But as a leader, as the leader of the Scottish Government, even I'm an independent supporter, I was an SNP voter, our legacy isn't that positive. I think there's going to be a lot of polishing of various turds to try and find something good in the events of her leadership, because there are so many negatives. And I don't think hatred, as Thomas just mentioned, is one of them. I will say that. I think if there's division in the independence debate, it always comes from the other side, not the side I support.
But it's the record that you're concerned about, the record of achievement.
I don't think it's as good as it could have been. Okay. I think there was a lot of talk.
OK, thank you. Thank you. Lady down here with the glasses. Yeah.
I just want to point out, I think it's incredibly bold for a Conservative MSP to sit here and retrospectively critique how Nicola Sturgeon handled the pandemic when your party leader at the time, who ran this entire country, on their own in hospital, and he held parties with your fellow MSPs and politicians. So I think it's incredibly bold for you to sit here and discuss the pandemic as a Conservative.
I think you made a valid point, and you would have found that myself and my colleagues at Holyrood were full-throated in what we said in relation to the actions of Boris Johnson in Downing Street. But two wrongs don't make a right in this regard, and I think it is very important that if we're looking at Nicola Sturgeon's legacy, we bear in mind that there was politicking going on then, and I think that's pretty shameful. But that doesn't let Boris Johnson off the hook by any measure or means. All
right, and finally, the lady here. Yes.
I think it is a very mixed legacy that she does leave. Yes, it was good to have a woman First Minister, and it's shown that women and young girls can go that far, but she has left our country in a very, very bad state by focusing on independence and slipping on things like education and health.
I'll see the history books. I have to say, your views, the hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Tonight, we're in Cumbernauld. Next week, we're going to be in Galashiels, in the Scottish borders. So if you'd like to come along and be part of the audience for that show, just go to the address that's on your screen. You can scan the QR code as well. It'd be great to see you there. Let's go to our second question of the night, which comes from Owen Gallagher. Owen, evening.
If Anis Sarwar promised no austerity under Labour, how can he then justify the severe welfare cuts now being planned?
Thank you, Owen. Read my lips, no austerity under Labour. That was the words of Anis Sarwar on the debate night election leader special, actually, last June. Nothing confirmed yet, but speculation that the government is about to announce £6 billion in welfare cuts at the end of this month. Craig Hoy, Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall said there are people taking the mickey out there when it comes to benefits. Do you agree with that?
I hate to say I do, and I think that's not just in the rest of the UK, that's happening here in Scotland. I think that the welfare system is there for a very real reason and purpose. It's very, very important. But it is also unsustainable, and it's unsustainable in a Scottish context. I'm going to give you some figures. I don't want to throw lots of figures at you. But the welfare bill in Scotland at this moment in time is costing between £4 and £5 billion a year. That's set to nearly double to £9 billion by the end of this decade. And the reason being, partly because we are not getting people through the NHS, so they're not being treated, so more and more people who could work and who want to work are being parked on benefits. They're waiting for hip or knee operations. But there's also something about policy choices. And the Scottish Government have decided, now that they've started to devolve benefits, that they want to make it light touch. They don't want to ask too many intrusive questions. I get that, and I understand that. But you've also got to look at it from the taxpayer's point of view. And I go out and knock on doors or speak to people in the pub or the supermarket, and they say, look, I've gone out to work for all of my adult life. I took a short period where I was sick for whatever reason, but I wanted to get back to work. Now, in Scotland, because of this light touch system that the SNP have put in place, it means that more and more people are going on to the adult disability benefit payment, which is fine if they need it and they qualify for it. But if they don't, then there should be regular reviews to say to them, can you now work? Because you should be at work if you can. And down south in England, 16% of people every year, at the point of that review, are being taken off the benefit. In Scotland, that's only 2%.
Okay.
It's only 1 in 50. So I think we need to move away from a light touch system of benefits to a realistic system of benefits where people who can work should work, because actually that's how we'll grow the tax base, that's how we'll fund our public services, and that's fairer for everybody.
So Labour's looking at doing the right thing here. You'd support it?
Yeah, I would support looking at the scale and scope of the welfare bill, providing we stick to one basic principle, that those in need still get the benefits they need. I think the problem we've seen in Scotland, we've seen a kind of mission creep, more and more benefits coming in, some of them very valid, like the child payment. I think it's very hard to disagree with, and I certainly wouldn't. But I think if you have a light touch system, then you will get people who just think, I don't have to go to work, so therefore I'll put myself on that benefit.
A light touch system here,
No,
Fulton MacGregor?
I have to say I couldn't disagree more with Craig. I really couldn't. I think that people who need our support, people with disabilities who are finding it difficult to work, need our full and utter support. And I do not accept for a minute that we've got a light touch system. People do not choose, I feel anyway, people do not choose to simply not work. They need support, and if any caring society and state should support its most vulnerable people.
But we have
and it's
1 in 8
absolute
young people in Scotland are not in education, work or training. A soaring bill for all of this. How do we deal with that?
Well, we do need to create good jobs. We need to create good jobs through industries. But the way that we don't deal with it is penalising and scapegoating the most marginalised people in our society. I just can't accept that. And I've got a lot of respect for Monica Lennon, and I know that she's got very strong views on this issue as well, which she'll come to. But I cannot believe the tact that the Labour Party are taking. To hear Craig Hoy there say that he fully agrees with the UK government, with the Labour UK government's tact on this, shows you where they are with it. And you know, I think it's an absolutely disgraceful situation.
So how will you deal with it here in Scotland? I mean, some of these are reserved, some of them are devolved benefits. Will you seek to mitigate any changes that Labour makes on this and make sure they don't touch people in Scotland? Because that's going to have a huge cost.
Well, we can't just mitigate everything. You know that, and people do know that. We've mitigated so much already. We've mitigated we've already planned to mitigate the winter fuel payment.
The two-child cap.
The two-child cap. Various other policies that have came over the years. But the Scottish Parliament can't just be there to mitigate. We need to get governments that actually represent Scotland in Westminster as well. And at this point in time, whether it's been a blue or a red government, it's not doing the job for Scotland.
OK. I'd love to hear from you in the audience. If you've got family members, perhaps, or you yourselves, gentleman with the glasses in the second back row. Yes.
Is the truth of the matter not that the Labour have kind of put themselves between a rock and a hard place? You're not raising taxes, you're not taxing the rich who can afford to help these people, so you really don't have a choice in this matter. And I'm curious to see what the SNP or other alternative parties would say. Chris Hoy has obviously made it clear he wouldn't raise taxes, so where is this money coming from if we don't cut welfare? Not that I agree with it.
Thank you. Lady in front with the glasses as well, yes.
I think the thing is that a lot of the disabled community don't feel like they're being listened to in this debate, and I think that they should be centred in this, and we really need to listen to them and hear from them on their needs.
Thank you. Man in the front row.
I'm interested in the comment about the light touch. Recently, I know of someone who made an application for some support, real needs for support, and she was sent a 31-page document to fill in, which, not being the brightest light in the tree, but I found it difficult even to read the document. 31 pages to apply for some marginal help. Got it filled in, sent it away. We got a letter back saying we need 11 weeks to deal with the application. It came back and says, you're not getting anything. So we're in a situation, I believe, where the Labour government in Westminster have just voted themselves a 5.5% increase in their salaries. And in Scotland, it's 3.6%. I think they've they've voted an increase as well. So they're looking after themselves, but this winter, I had no winter fuel payment. It's costing us about £11 a day for heating, a pensioner. So light touch, I don't think so. You're battering the old age pensioners, and every party is responsible. No one single party can step back and say, it's not our fault. You're all responsible for how you're treated. Just in closing, this idea of light touch. At the moment, it's 30 months wait to go and have an audiology test done. 30 months. But if you've got £1,000, you could get it done next week. So we've got a two-tier health system right across the system. And I find that appalling.
Thank you. Thank you. Monica Lennon, every Labour MP is going in to see Keir Starmer either today or tomorrow to hear about what is coming with welfare. Is this why you got into politics as a Labour politician, to cut welfare?
So I think we have to be careful what we say because we don't know the details yet, and I understand why people are worried. And I think the point that was made about the disabled community in particular, I'm the patron of a disability organisation, and I think the point you've made is really valid. So we'll get details hopefully very soon, because when things are trailed in the media days in advance, weeks in advance, it gets everyone anxious and worked up. I am concerned about some of the things that I've heard, and I know that colleagues are having very live discussions. I think the reality is that after 14 years of a chaotic and corrupt Tory government, the Labour government, well, Craig shakes his head, but that is absolutely the truth. We've seen an absolute explosion in the rise of food banks. The working poor is a term that we've just used now. It rolls off the tongue. It's just not acceptable. And the idea that living on benefits, I think Craig said people being parked on benefits, have some respect, have some dignity for people. So, you know, being on, there might be some people, a minority of people, who abuse the system and get a bit more than what they're entitled to, but there's also plenty of people
Monica,
who
this isn't a Conservative government proposing this.
No.
It's apparently Labour government that is looking at this.
So I just wanted to
briefly say... So how do you feel about that?
We've had to inherit an absolute mess.
But these are choices.
And
Politicians make choices about what they do.
So what I'm saying is we have to approach this really, really carefully. I've just made the point, Stephen, that life on benefits isn't fun. And if you're on benefits because you're disabled and you're on those benefits because you're not able to work, then we have to be very careful about any changes that are made there. But on the other side of it, the UK Labour government is doing some fantastic things that a Tory government would never do, and certainly Reform would never do. So getting people better pay at work, better trade union rights, day one rights, because we've had, under the Tories, we've had fired and rehired, people getting bullied out of their jobs and forced to take worse terms and conditions. So with Angela Rayner and the Labour government, we're seeing big changes.
Monica, I'm sorry, but you're not answering the question yet. How can Labour justify the severe welfare cuts now being
Stephen,
planned?
nothing's been published yet. Have you seen the bill? I haven't seen a bill.
MPs have been pulled in to see the Prime Minister today and tomorrow to talk about it.
And I'm not an MP and I'm on your show tonight. So what I'm saying to you is, let's not get people panicked and alarmed until we see the detail. You know, there's no detail here, so we're just speculating. And,
Monica's saying that they would do things that we would never have done. You did something that we would never have done, which was you took away the winter fuel payment. How can you justify that to the people of Scotland?
Well, I think Craig knows my position, the position of Scottish Labour, and I don't think it was the right decision. It certainly wasn't the right decision for Scotland. But Anna Sauer's been very clear about what we would do in government differently.
Would you take the same approach?
And we've supported the Scottish Government to try and do more.
Would you take the same approach to changes to welfare? No, would you take the same approach to changes to welfare that you've taken to the winter fuel allowance, which is it shouldn't happen?
So, look, I don't think anyone in the audience at home would say there should never be any welfare reforms. That word reform is very vague. So I think it's right for an incoming government to look at every department and say, how can we run this better? How can we get it right for people? How can we support those people who want to work, who don't have opportunities? How do we make that easier? On the point about disabled people, supported employment opportunities are very, very rare now. With Brian Leishman, the MP for Grangemouth and Alloa, my colleague Richard Leonard, we've sat down with the Scottish Government to try and save jobs in Larbert, in the Falkirk area, because that was supported employment for people with severe autism, ADHD and other health conditions who, because of health and safety reasons, can't get mainstream employment. So that's what Labour is looking at as well. But you're asking me to speculate on a bill that hasn't been published. That would be irresponsible. And frankly, all that's going to do is cause more panic and alarm. What those Labour MPs will be doing in Downing Street is asking questions, raising casework concerns. Well, you know, we've got reform here, jump from Tory to reform.
Labour MPs are not going to question Keir Starmer on this. We've seen that when it came to winter fuel allowance, we've seen that when it came to WASPy women, we've seen that when it came to Grangemouth. You said Anna Sarwar's been clear, Monica, and I've got a lot of respect for you, but Anna Sarwar has never been clear about a thing in his life. He flips and flops on every single issue possible when it comes to this sort of stuff. You're sitting there attacking other parties when it comes to the welfare estate.
I'm saying there is no welfare bill, but I'm not going to take lectures off the guy who jumped into bed with Nigel Farage, who wants a two-tier NHS.
You don't need to take
Nigel Farage who said, you know, you've got to pay or have an insurance-based system like America.
I'm glad that you're.
Because the point about
let him respond. I'm glad that your political lines that you've been taught to come around and attack reform has managed to land tonight.
This is what Nigel Farage stands for. You've joined
at the same time. Labour MPs were promised they came into power last year promising change. The first thing they done was remove the winter fuel allowance from pensioners across this country. To sit there and try and attack every other party when it's your government that's making these choices, it's very easy to be in opposition, as you've known for the past 14 years. Now you're in government, government's hard. So you need to take responsibility when your party make tough decisions.
Monica, I'll let you come back in a second, but we've said a few times that people in the audience will be panicked about this discussion. Let's find out if they are. Man with the beard down here. Yes. On you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think, firstly, Labour need to do themselves a favour, Scottish Labour that is, and actually separate themselves from Westminster Labour. Because there's an election here next year, and you don't have a chance if you're having to defend everything that Keir Starmer does. Now, I don't disagree with everything Starmer's done, and I think it's laughable that you've got somebody for reform talking about flip-flops when Nigel Farage will go wherever the most money wants to pay him, quite frankly. And you've got a Tory MSP and an SNP MSP who have absolutely destroyed this country over the last 18 years, and they think Labour should have resolved everything in 8 months. It's pathetic. But Anna Sarwar has to clearly separate himself from Starmer so that he can say to the Scottish people, this is what I'll offer you as First Minister. I'll stand up for you and not just do whatever Westminster Labour says, because that's what the Scottish Tory MPs did when they were down there, and they voted against money coming to this country, so we can't have that.
Right, Monica, I'll come in just a second. Lady in the back row first, though, right in the middle. Yes, on you go.
I just wanted to say that I think when we talk about welfare reforms, there's always this sense that, oh, everybody's a time waster, everybody's, lazy, they don't want to work. And I think that that's just a very, very small minority of people that we're talking about. And what I think then happens is that stigmatises the genuine people who are the majority, who do need the welfare benefits and who are made to feel that they're the shirkers, they're the people who are, hanging it up, for want of a better term. And I think that that's the tragedy of this, that I think we're really focusing on the small number of people who may fall into that category of not wanting to work, but actually it's bigger than not wanting to work. A lot of people are on benefits who actually genuinely could never work, and I think that to be made feel bad about it is probably one of the worst things that we could do to them.
Thank you. Lady down here. Yes.
In my opinion, I don't believe that whether just like Monica speaks to Keir Starmer or whatever, whether it will make any difference to Scotland or whatever. I just don't believe that he cares about Scotland anyway.
What would you say to that, Monica? And if you were talking to Keir Starmer tonight, as Labour MPs are, what would you say to him?
So, I completely recognise how hard it is for the UK government to come in and rebuild our economy and our public services. The Tories in Reform don't care about the issues we've raised tonight, about the backlog in the NHS and the barriers that people face, and they're just going to give you populist answers. But what I would say to my Labour colleagues, particularly those in government, down in Westminster, is they have to tread very carefully and they have to get this right. We've come through the pandemic, that's been talked about already tonight. That has left people living with long COVID. We've got people living with trauma and mental health, including those who are in the front line working in the NHS and in social care and in other really difficult jobs during that period. That has consequences. We've got parts of our economy that are not working, so we need to unlock those opportunities. But to say that Labour doesn't care about Scotland, there's a record £5.2 billion come to the Scottish Government. It's the biggest ever settlement for Scotland in the history of devolution. We need to make sure that money is spent wisely in Scotland and how we spend our money wisely. But there needs to be a bigger debate about how unequal Britain is. That's the way that Nigel Farage wants to keep it, and the rich people who support the Conservative Party and their donors. But we do need to look at how we redistribute wealth, because we're a very wealthy country, but there's a lot of tax breaks and contracts given out to those with the big shoulders, and we can't have the people who've got the least having to then be told, oh, we need to come and cut your benefits. So I expect that Labour colleagues will make very robust representations, because we all know our constituents, we all have families, you know, it affects our families too, and we have to get this right. But I would go back to the point where we started. There isn't a bill yet, there isn't a detailed plan, there's been media speculation which suits the Tories in the forum. So let's just try and bring a bit of calm, because people will be getting worried and getting frightened, and we have to get this right.
OK, I'm sure we'll talk about this again on the programme. The hashtag, if you want to get involved in the discussion tonight, is BBCDN on social media. Let's go to our next question of the night, which comes from Ryan McCready. Ryan, evening.
Evening. What can progressive parties in Scotland learn from the rise of far-right populism to better connect with the working class and with disillusioned voters?
Interesting. Ryan, what do you think?
I think a lot of us are worried about the increasing popularity of National Rally in France, of the AfD in Germany, you know, Trump in for his second term. And I think, whether we find this distasteful or not, something they are saying is cutting through that progressive parties, mainstream parties, are failing to do. We get told by Westminster that there's 0.1% economic growth and that we should be happy about that. But, you know, we've got rising inequality, we've got the working poor, and that is not connecting, but something that these, I guess, far-right populist parties are saying is, if you look at recent polling, if you look at the increasing support for the likes of Reform. OK, you'd put Reform in with that as well, would you? Sorry, Councillor, yes. Yeah, OK. Do you recognise that description, far-right populism?
No,
for Reform, Thomas Kerr?
I think we've managed to get to a place in Scottish politics where the consensus bubble in Holyrood has pulled people so far to the centre that as soon as you're right-wing, you're seen as far-right. And I think that brandish of far-right has fallen away. I don't see Reform as far-right. I see other political parties that have been mentioned as far-right. I don't see Reform as being in that sort of angle, though. Going back to the original question about how progressives can try and change the narrative, obviously, for me, I don't think that they'll be able to be honest with you, because I think the answers that many people in the left have are just so detached from many working class communities. I represent Shelton in the East End of Glasgow. I spend all my time in the East End of Glasgow. I'm from Cranhill. I'm an East End working class guy. And when you're in these communities, they had years and years of Labour in charge, and they were failed by them. They were then swapped by the SNP, and they gave them a chance. And then we had 14 years of the Conservatives. And obviously, in the intro that Stephen had said, I got so fed up and angry that I felt as if my voice inside my own party when I was in the Conservatives was not listened to, that working class communities had been left behind and forgotten. And I think that Reform is offering an opportunity for people to really speak up. So if you look at the policies that we have, we'll have policy platform properly ahead of Holyrood.
What we have other parties aren't offering?
So we have principles that people know that we won't shirk on. So stuff like the fact that we think net zero, for example, is making people poorer. We think that the reality is everybody wants to try and tackle the climate emergency, absolutely, but having arbitrary targets on net zero is making every single person in this audience poorer. It's not making the political elite poorer, it's not making people in Holyrood poorer, but it's making my constituents in the East End of Glasgow poorer. It's making taxi drivers who have been sacked in Glasgow because of the low emissions zone poorer. So I think that's one of the policies where we're very different from the other parties that are here. When you look at other stuff when it comes to wokeism, we're very, very clear on what it is a woman is. We don't want to get into these arguments about what women are and this sort of stuff. We'd much rather we focused our time in education on making sure standards are better, on making sure the apprentices are opened up and making sure that people have a real opportunity in life. So I think that progressive parties will try their hardest, but when you spend as much time as I do in the East End of Glasgow, people are scunnered and fed up, and they don't hear any of the answers by the other panellists as a way of trying to make any change.
Thank you. And I know that we have Reform voters in the audience here this evening. You two have actually got history because you campaigned together back at the Rutherglen by-election before the defection took place, Craig Hoy. And that defection took place, Thomas Kerr says, because the Conservatives had lost touch with working-class people in Scotland.
Well, I don't think that's the case, and actually Thomas didn't think that was the case just a matter of months ago, because as you say, I was on the doorsteps of Rutherglen with Thomas where he was making the point that it was the Scottish Conservative Party that was standing up for those bread and butter issues, those common sense issues. And I don't think anything's changed there. I mean, Thomas can account for why he's decided to move to reform. There's lots of reasons people leave political parties, but it's not always on a point of principle. But let me be completely frank with you, Ryan, about that original question. Politicians that don't listen force people to the extremes. Now, you've seen that with the left in certain periods, you're seeing it to the right. And I think actually one clear example, if I go out into my local communities in the East Lothian or the borders or the southwest of Scotland, the area I represent, people say, what are you doing about the pothole that's just pranged my car? What are you doing about the safe spaces in school for my grandchildren or for my wife that's going to be in hospital next time around? What are you doing for the fact that I'm paying all this money in tax and council tax, but yet I seem to get less and less every single year? And if we continue to ignore people's real concerns, then I think people will move to the extremes in politics. But I think what I would say quite clearly, and under Russell Finlay, I think you've seen this in the Scottish Conservatives, is we're standing up for common sense, centrist Scottish Conservative policies. We're talking the same language that people out there in the country are. We'll bring forward policies that will be crystal clear about where we stand, and we've done that recently, and we'll continue to do that.
How worried are you about reform? I mean, speculation is they could take 15 seats next year.
This is the interesting thing, and it would be interesting to hear from Thomas, because who are Reform and what do they ultimately stand for? We know that senior members of Reform and senior officials with Reform have actually come from the SNP. They want to break up Britain. We hear from Reform that they've got a very simplistic policy solution to stopping the boats, but it's one that's woefully impractical. And ultimately, between now and the election, I think it will be for us to set out a positive policy platform. But I think there's another issue here, because we've seen it in opinion polls and we saw it in the general election. In the general election, a vote for Reform often let the SNP win, because what you're doing is dividing a unionist vote that's already split. So not only are, I think, Reform quite soft on the union with senior members, Thomas isn't one of them, but senior members who actually support independence, people who vote Reform right around Scotland will wake up the day after next election and find they've not got a Reform MSP, they've actually got another SNP MSP, and if that's what they want to do, then they are literally committing Scotland to another 5 years of a failed SNP government.
I think that's really, really important, because we've heard this, and I've argued this inside the Conservative Party when I was there for 14 years. This tripe of only a vote for the Scottish Conservatives can beat this or that. We have had 2 terms of an SNP and Green government, despite the rhetoric that the Conservative Party has put out. Now, Craig says that there are senior people, these big baddies in Reform, that nobody quite knows who they are. Not me, but apparently, but everybody else who is very, very soft on the union. Reform is an unashamedly pro-UK party. Now, that may make some people in this audience
you were unashamedly a member of the Conservative Party 2 months ago.
And I was arguing inside the Conservative Party for a long time, Craig, that the direction this party was heading in was wrong.
You also tweeted last year that Reform were apologists for Vladimir Putin and pro-Indy. What changed?
So, well, the tweet that I had put out, and I could have, when I had made the decision to defect to Reform, I could have deleted every single social media post. I wanted to keep that one up because it was important to me to make the point that at that point, last July, I did believe that. But when I've seen the professionalisation of Reform, and I've seen the people who are in Reform, and when I see that what we've now offering people, I have a very different opinion on that.
OK, man with the beard and moustache in the middle, yes.
Hi there, yeah, a question particularly for Thomas. Are there no trans women in Cumbernauld or in the East End of Glasgow that need support and representation by politicians? And also, as a trade unionist myself, what is Reform UK? Because it is a UK party and you're sitting in Scotland. What is their policy on people's right to withdraw their labour and go on strike?
OK, I'll come back to you on it, Thomas. Let me just take one more. The gentleman at the back. Yes, on you go.
I just want to say that the right-wing parties are giving people targets to hate. People are angry. They're upset. We've had Brexit, we've had the pandemic, we've had the energy price crisis, the cost of living crisis, the war in Ukraine, everything that's going on in America right now. People are angry. They're scared of what's going on in the world. And the right-wing parties are saying, well, it's that guy's fault. And a lot of people who are not bad people are latching onto that and saying, well, I'm going to blame him as well because it makes me feel better. It gives me something cathartic. And that's why I think they're gaining traction with some people, because we have been left behind by the progressive parties, by the likes of the Tory party as well, especially in Westminster. Since Brexit, they've just been talking to themselves about politics instead of doing anything to make the country better.
Thank you. Fulton MacGregor, SNP, have the traditional parties, progressive parties, have they left people behind?
Well, the first thing I want to say is you could probably do a spin-off show between Tory and Reform if you wanted to let them tear lumps out of each other. And I thought we were going to descend into that there, and myself and Monica wouldn't get back in for the rest of the night. But I want to address some of the questions. I do believe that Reform are a right-wing, far-right party. However, what's really important for me to say, and I think it's already been touched on by some of the audience, is not everybody who votes for Reform will be far-right. Far from it, actually. Normal people are obviously attracted to them.
And why are they doing that? Why are they attracted to them?
Well, I do think there is a dissatisfaction with politics as a whole. We've got to take some responsibility on that. The SNP, Labour, Conservatives. And if we look at what's happening in the UK as a whole, you know, there's no wonder there's dissatisfaction. So we do need to address that. I know that the First Minister's calling a summit in May, which will coincide with a year to the next Scottish Parliament election, to look at how the parties can, you know, work together to deal with the threat of the far right.
What do you mean by that? Work together to deal with the threat of the far right? What do you hope will come out of that summit?
Well, I think it's maybe having better politics. I think what I've, for instance, become an MSP, and Monica touched on it in one of her earlier answers, is the public actually expect us to work together. They expect us to work together to find solutions. And we don't often do that, and we've got to take responsibility for that.
And you're not going to take part in this summit, the Scottish Conservatives, are you?
No, we haven't said that. What we're saying is we have had a hold the diary, a date. We don't actually know what the substance of the meeting will be. And I think the interesting thing will be, will that meeting be willing to discuss people's dissatisfaction, for example, with the SNP's gender recognition laws? Will they be willing to discuss all of the issues that are making people so angry?
Craig, you're just showing the point of why people are dissatisfied in moving to Reform. Because you're laser focusing in on one particular issue, and you just want to bring it up for everything. The First Minister is offering a summit of all the parties to talk about how we deal with the threat of the far right. And there you are right on, well, we're not going to go if we're not talking about gender recognition.
Fulton, the point I'm making is we can only talk about the threat of the far right if that meeting will also discuss what has created the situation we're in. And I think that's the point. It can't just be a talking shop. We have to get to the nuts and bolts of that to understand why people are so dissatisfied with your government and with what's happening down south. But if we don't do that, it'll just simply be another SNP talking shop.
No, well, that's not the case.
Let me hear from the lady in the front row here.
I think it's all very well looking at having summits and having chats and meetings.
Absolutely.
But I think the public here are saying to you guys, get back out in the street and ask the public. Why are they choosing Reform? Why are they choosing you? You know, did Labour get in because they were absolutely sick, fed up with the Tories? Is that why they got in? You know, are SNP going to begin to get that? You have to stop meeting and get out and ask the public.
Thank you. And the lady with the short hair on the aisle there. Yes, on you go.
I think you all talk about the far right and everything like that. What we're really talking about is immigration. And we're talking about women's safety. I live in Cumbernauld, but I work in Glasgow. And I've got so many friends who've been followed from their houses and everything like that by people who are not Scottish, and they've been threatened and they feel uncomfortable about it. If you live in the south side of Glasgow, you can't walk past a tenement house without people sitting there smoking, whatever, and they make people feel
As soon as you said that, the lady next to you, her hand shot up. On you go.
I'm sorry, I just really don't agree with that. I don't agree with the whole... I understand everyone's fear with the whole immigration, the boats coming in, and I 100% I agree, like, I don't agree, but I understand everyone's point and take on it. But when you're saying there's people being followed and you're just generalising the whole race, really.
Have you walked around the south side of Glasgow?
I have, but I don't really feel particularly threatened by someone of a certain race, and I feel like that's the way you're kind of making it out there.
OK, all right. Monica Lennon. Do we need a summit to discuss the rise of the right?
Well, I think when the First Minister makes an open offer to bring parties together, I think that can only be a good thing. I think parties should engage in constructive talks. But to go back to the original question and to the point that was made by the lady in the front row about politicians getting out there, that absolutely is key, and that's certainly what Scottish Labour is doing. So in the coming weeks, the Labour MP Katrina Murray for Cumbernauld has Jackie Bailey and Anna Sarwar coming to have a listening event with people in the community.
What do you think we can learn
about the NHS? Because when we look at our casework and look at the inquiries coming in for help, it is people who are waiting too long for GP appointments, for operations, social care packages that don't exist, problems in education, justice, local government, closures. We're sitting in Cumbernauld Theatre, which is at risk because of funding cuts coming from Creative Scotland. We can't allow these fantastic facilities to close. So, you know, Anna Sarwar is out there absolutely standing up for Scotland because he's listening every day of the week. Well, I can assure you he spends as little time as possible in Parliament, so he's out there in the community meeting with businesses, with workers, with communities, because that's the only way we're going to get our policies right. And
Monica, Reform came third here at the general election. The question is, what can we learn from the rise of Reform and other parties on the right?
Well, I think we can recognise that people are a bit scunnered with the way politics has been done in this country for, you know, easily the last decade. And under the 17 years of the SNP, you know, there has been a lot of hype and there has been some good things too, but then I think people are now feeling things are not getting better. So people, I think, are putting the main parties on notice to say, look, there's someone else, we can put in a protest vote. But if you vote for Thomas, who's been in, I think, maybe three parties now.
Like most voters in Scotland, Monica, I went from Labour to Conservative to Reform.
Led by Nigel Farage, who's been in many parties and they've all ended in disaster. I would not put my trust in Nigel Farage.
OK, just briefly, Thomas.
Briefly on one point, because people are asking about the scunneredness and why people are fed up with politics. They're fed up with politics because of politicians like Anna Sarwar, who says he's going to back Grangemouth and then doesn't, who says he's going to back the WSP women and then doesn't, who says he's not going to support welfare cuts and there won't be any austerity and then does. So I hope Anas's visit here goes very well, but I would be very reluctant for people in Cumbernauld to believe a word that he has.
All right, let's wrap this up with the audience. Lady with the fabulous hair on the second back row, yeah.
Thomas, I find it funny how you're saying you're not a far-right party. Your leader was tried to get into Trump's inauguration. You've got them over there trying to talk about Scottish issues, which JD Vance talking about buffer zones. They're coming after us here, and you're trying to say, no, we're nothing like them. Your leader was there.
OK, all right. Views on all of this from home. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. I know you'll have a lot to say about this. We want to try and squeeze one more question in tonight, and it comes from Elaine Watson. Elaine, where are you? Evening. Hi.
Should weight loss jabs be freely available on the NHS?
Thanks, Elaine. According to BBC Scotland News research, only a very few people in Scotland are actually being prescribed weight loss drugs at the moment. But 2/3 of the population in Scotland is overweight, 1/3 clinically obese. Monica Lennon, Wes Streeting has said that this could be life-changing, alleviating strains on the NHS, but also opening up opportunities for people in life. Should these weight loss jabs be freely available in the NHS?
I would say, in principle, yes. It depends on the particular drug, and we have to make sure that, you know, it's clinically sound and effective. But, you know, what we're talking about is people who have health complications, people who are living with obesity, who, you know, have been living with a lot of stigma as well and told just exercise, just change your diet, and these things don't work for them. So again, it has to be what's right for an individual patient. It has to be clinically led. But if something can help someone live a healthier life and ensure that into the future they've got less health complications. That can only be a good thing. But as I said, we've come in to government down in Westminster. The NHS is on its knees. Everything is having to be looked at. I know that Wes Streeting, as Health Secretary, is really trying to support the workforce, but also to modernise in terms of technology, but also to look at the drugs that are available. And, you know, to make sure that we continue to invest in research so we get good clinical trials and we get evidence-led medicine.
If we did it here in Scotland, it costs $2 billion, about 10% of the NHS budget, as it is at the moment. Should we be doing it, Fulton MacGregor?
I find myself agreeing with Monica here. I think in principle it sounds like it could be a good idea, but we would need to know, you know, the efficacy of it, the safety of them. I think they are the crucial the crucial
well, they're
factors.
available at the moment. People are ordering them by private prescription
but
at the
I know
moment,
that,
paying £150 a time themselves.
Yeah, but I know there is some concerns about their safety, so I think we would need to really get that ironed out. But if, you know, it's a clinically led decision by a GP or another clinician, and they feel that that is the best course of treatment for somebody, then if that treatment is through the NHS, then it should be free at the point of contact.
So where would the money come from for that?
Well, it would need to be it would need to be incorporated into the NHS budget. You know, it would be like any other treatment that's, you know, on the cards just now. It would need to be incorporated. It's a lot of money, as you say. So I think a lot of thought would need to be given to it.
Lady in the black here, yeah.
Yes, so obviously the spending for these weight loss jabs would be enormous. But one of the biggest problems with obesity crisis is the price of food. The price of food is enormous in this country. Inflation has went up unbelievably, particularly for healthy food. Education is not particularly doing well in educating what is healthy meals. You've got adverts all the time for fast food, Just Eat, etc., making it a quick, easy fix. And that is what people are possibly, if it is for very high-ranging obesity and weight loss issues, then that, of course, is a different spark. But what is going on right now is so many people are on these jabs. There's not a lot of research. People are now relying on it for fertility and basically for a quick fix. And because of the price of food, because of lack of education, this could lead to health problems. A lady in South Lanarkshire died because of this. So I think there needs to be greater respect for GPs and for health professionals to direct these weight loss labs who it's for properly.
Thank you. I think there's 1 million people now across the UK privately paying for these. Craig Hoy, should it be available on the NHS?
I think it should be a tool that is available, but it shouldn't necessarily be universally available. I think it depends on an individual's circumstances. I can see, I listened to the radio this morning, there was a programme about it, and the clinicians were saying they think it's safe, they think it will be effective, but it is very expensive. And I think the other point about it is people who are going privately and doing it mail order, you're meant to have blood taking, you're meant to be working with a medical profession as you're taking it. It's not something you should be doing independently at home. So it is relatively new, as you say. I think it should be looked at because we're also spending a huge amount of money treating chronic conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, strokes and other illnesses which are linked to being overweight. So I think it's a tool we should look at. I think also it will be expensive. And I was visiting the Borders General Hospital late last week, and they were making the point that one of the things they do say to patients is that exercise is vital. And exercise is relatively free if you've got access to it, and that you've got mobility. And I think it's a tool we should use alongside other tools, but not to the exclusion of other tools.
Thomas Kerr?
Well, I agree with largely what everybody else in the panel said. I think that it's something that should be looked at as a tool for an individual, depending on the case. I know certainly looking at my weight, I could probably do with some myself, but that's a different story. But I think there's a bigger question here about exercise and teaching people in particular about healthy foods. I'm obviously a counsellor in Glasgow, and one of the big things that we're facing is a lot of local authority gyms and community centres and things have been closed because of years of cuts that we've had towards local authority budgets. So I think we need to have a full-blown look at this to try and make sure that gyms are accessible and are cheap enough for people to be able to get exercise as well, because these weight loss jabs are good, but they are an easy fix if you don't do exercise and everything else afterwards. And I think we need to make sure that that goes along with it as well.
Monica, an easy fix at the end of the day, these weight loss jabs, rather than dealing with the difficult stuff around this?
Well, I don't think any of us are clinicians. I don't think we talk about it being an easy fix. I mean, there'll be people in this audience who might ask their GP for a certain medication and then be told, actually, because of risk factors or family history. So these are always like decisions that have to be made in consultation with your clinician. I chair a group in the Parliament, a cross-party group on women's health, and there's many women who come to that group who are not often believed by medical professionals, who live with chronic conditions, including conditions like lipedema, which is very painful, and women who have that condition have just been told, you're overweight, you need to lose weight, and it's impossible. And the treatment for that, which is liposuction, is now no longer available in Scotland. So we have to be careful that people are not forced to make bad and dangerous choices. The internet, you know, TikTok, Instagram, it's like the Wild West out there. And it's a real shame because when people are feeling really bad about themselves, when they're living in pain, because people who are living with severe obesity can also be living in pain with other conditions. So we just have to make sure we get it right. But it comes back to the point about investing in our NHS to get it right for people today and tomorrow, but also for the longer term, because money that we invest into the NHS and in healthcare and wellness more generally, that is an investment worth its weight in gold, because we've got people here across the country who've been living with lots of conditions that could have been prevented if there'd been that earlier intervention, and that's something that we have to get right, and that's what Scottish Labour is committed to.
Okay, man in the front row, yes.
What you're talking about is leading us towards this two-tier health system. If you've got the money, you can buy the drugs. What about the people who can't afford the drugs, but because of the ineptitude of the government over 14 years, there's these extended wait times for crucial definite needs of patients' health, where I said earlier, 30 months to get your hearing tested. But if I had money, you could go and get it in Specsavers next week.
Fulton MacGregor, is that where we are? We've got a two-tier health system in Scotland.
There are many other issues, and I've got to say it's the first opportunity. You know, the Scottish Nationalist Party should hang their head in shame for the way that they've treated the public in Scotland with the health service. I know of a situation recently where there were no towels in the ward to wash someone. They were told there are no towels, so you'll just need to miss today getting washed. Okay. That's a fact.
All right, Fulton, come back in on this.
Well, there's no doubt that there's concerns, and I think shared by all the parties who believe in the NHS, that there is the possibility of a two-tier system, because we know that people can access private care, and if they access private care, they tend to get that quicker. This is a problem in Scotland. It's a problem across the UK. You see the sort of general waiting times for all different sorts of issues are pretty similar. So it's an issue that we're facing across the UK as a whole. The budget that we've just passed in the Scottish Parliament, that Craig's party didn't vote for, made record funding. It made record funding for the NHS, and I know that the First Minister and the Cabinet Secretary for Health are committed to taking on those challenges of waiting times and things like A&E waiting times as well. And they are things that we need to do, because we do have a brilliant healthcare system. Okay. We do have good workers.
And it's something that we discuss frequently on debate night as well. That's it for this evening, though. We're back with you next week in Gala Shields. Have a look at our website if you want to come along and join us for that. If you missed any of tonight's programme, it's on BBC One Scotland a little bit later, or you can catch it any time on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight, and to our audience here in Cumbernauld, and to you at home for watching wherever you are in Scotland. We'll see you next week in Gala Shields. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well. From all of us in debate night, good night.